Good morning, everybody. My name is Alexis Potaman. I'm the MC for today. I like to start our meetings off by highlighting a couple of relevant core values. Today, I want to highlight human hands solve human problems. Seems pretty apt for today. And people are more important than beliefs. So we've got a great lineup for you today. Our main speaker is Valerie Tarico. I apologize if I mispronounced that. And our musician is Joseph Crump. All right. Our main speaker today is Valerie Tarico. Valerie is a psychologist and writer in Seattle, Washington. She's the author of Trusting Doubt, a former evangelical looks at old beliefs in a new light. Her articles about religion, reproductive health, and the role of women in society have been featured at sites including AlterNet, Salon, Huffington Post, Institute for Ethics and Emerging Technologies, and Jezebel. So please help me welcome to the screen, Valerie Tarico.
Thank you all for having me as your speaker today. I'm honored. The topic that we chose was kind of what is it that the pro-life, i.e. anti-abortion movement and religious child abuse have in common? Because on the surface, they seem completely at odds with each other, right? You have these people who are conservative evangelical Christians who in the political sphere are kind of staking a whole lot on being able to shut down the ability of people to decide when and whether to terminate a pregnancy or to carry it forward. And even they are opposing contraception, some of them, especially the most effective contraceptives, the pill and IUDs, because they claim that it might have the rare and unintended consequence of interfering with implantation, which they deem an abortion. And then on the other hand, they advocate spanking children. Parents make the news, Christian parents sometimes, for beating their children and having the rare and unintended consequence of battering them to death. So how is it that these two positions are at all compatible? Well, the answer to that question lies way back in the Iron Age view of what it means to be a child and to be a parent. So a modern view of childhood, a secular modern view of childhood, we think of children as persons with rights that are based on their capacities. So their rights are kind of a consequence of what they are able to do, and that means what their personhood is based on their ability to suffer and feel pleasure, to be aware and self-aware, to love and be loved, to have preferences and intentions that are expressed through decisions and actions, and to have dreams and goals that place a value on their own future. So these capacities, which make up personhood, they also make kind of human life uniquely precious in most people's eyes, and they emerge gradually during childhood, which is why children can't take care of themselves. So the role of parents is as custodians to basically fill the gaps where children don't yet have the full capacities of adult human personhood. And obviously those capacities change over time. And because of that, the role and responsibilities and rights of parents actually change over time too, right? So we think about, a 3-year-old, all things being equal, should be able to choose whether she wants a chocolate or vanilla ice cream cone if they're both available. A 7-year-old shouldn't really have any say in a custody dispute if parents are kind of in disagreement with each other or are trying to kind of reach a custody agreement. But a 14-year-old does have that capacity. And similarly, kind of when we think back about the reproductive sphere, the rights of children and adolescents, gradually the ability to consent to some kind of sexual contact emerges during adolescence. And we think of that being first and foremost kind of something where we kind of don't try to limit or reprove contact between same-sex adolescents, but on the other hand, we recognize that they remain vulnerable, still more so than adults, to being manipulated or controlled with relationship to sexuality. And so we protect them with statutory rape laws. So I want to read you a fragment of a poem that summarizes this modern secular view of what it means to be the child as a person. In 1923, Khalil Gibran published a much-loved book titled The Prophet, and it contains a poem called On Children. Gibran's poem and his worldview are deeply spiritual, but this perfectly reflects the modern view of childhood. He wrote, "Your children are not your children. They are the sons and daughters of life's longing for itself. They come through you, but not from you. And though they are with you, yet they belong not to you. You may give them your love, but not your thoughts, for they have their own thoughts. You may house their bodies, but not their souls, for their souls dwell in the house of tomorrow, which you cannot visit, not even in your dreams. You may strive to be like them, but seek not to make them like you, for life goes not backwards nor tarries with yesterday." Gibran's 20th century view of childhood would have been completely alien to the writers of the Bible. So let's take a look at the biblical view of childhood in order to understand why biblical literalists and traditionalists, kind of from other segments of Christianity in this country, have such an attitude of that seems contrary to what we just heard. In the Iron Age mindset of the Bible writers, children are not individual persons who have their own thoughts with corresponding rights. Rather, like livestock and slaves, they are possessions of the male head of household. So the biblical framework for governing the treatment of children is property law, not individual rights law. They are legally the term we now use is chattel, which is based on the term cattle, and I'll refer back to that. But chattel means movable personal property, so economic assets that are not real estate. In the Bible, children, like slaves and livestock, are chattel. Male children grow up to become persons, and we see throughout the Bible there are kind of actual reasonable articulations of what it means to treat other persons like you want to be treated. But females remain chattel throughout their lives. They are first assets of their fathers, and then they are assets belonging to their husbands. And so the whole idea of a father giving a girl in marriage to her husband kind of, again, derives from this idea that a female back through history was an economic asset that was transferred from one male to another. Now, the texts that are bound together in the Bible were written over hundreds of years, and they reflect some evolution of social and ethical norms. So they're within the Hebrew culture. Some of those writers expressed a more compassionate and dignifying perspective towards children than others. But fundamentalists and Bible believers treat these texts like a package, like they're the perfect and complete, literally perfect Word of God. And that is why these kinds of Christians all too often pit themselves against ethical, compassionate treatment of children, but also against the idea that women should be able to determine their own childbearing, to bring children into the world under their best circumstances at the time of their choosing with the partner of their choosing. Taken together, the biblical formula for parenthood is based on several core assumptions. So this first one that I've already articulated is that children are property of their fathers. It's why God allows Satan, for example, to kill Job's children in the Old Testament story during a wager over Job's loyalty, and then to simply replace them. It's why a man in the Old Testament who causes a woman to miscarry must pay her husband for the loss. The second biblical notion about children and childhood is that children are born bad. So this comes from the idea of original sin. And it is the idea that posits all humans are evil essentially because of Eve's transgression in kind of eating the forbidden fruit and persuading Adam to do so. And it's the belief then that this kind of internal sin gets handed down from person to person is the reason that in the New Testament narrative, Jesus had to be born of a virgin so that God is his father and that sin isn't passed down eternal line. And then later on, the Catholics adopted the idea that Mary also was born without blemish, so that Jesus didn't receive any kind of taint of sin, this inborn original sin from either of his parents. Children need to be in this, a third kind of point of kind of this biblical narrative. Children need to be beaten to keep them from going astray. So, in the gospel stories, Christ's only teaching on physical punishment is that whosoever is not, whosoever is without blame should cast the first stone. And we even know that that story was a late addition to the New Testament. But even so, many Christians prefer, King Solomon's spare the rod, spoil the child admonitions from the book of Proverbs. So another point of kind of the biblical view on children and parenthood is that a father's right of ownership extends even to killing his own child. So that's why it makes sense in the Old Testament for Abraham to sacrifice Isaac and for Jephthah to sacrifice his daughter. Or if you think again about the New Testament narrative, for God to give his only begotten son as a human sacrifice. In the Torah, a man can send his child into battle, or he can sell his child into slavery. And the Torah advises that a rebellious son should be put to death. Now, for females, the primary value of an adult female in this worldview is that she produces valuable children. And by valuable children, I mean, in particular, male children of known paternity. So that's why a female's virginity is treated like such a core part of her economic value. It's why a rapist can be forced to marry the damaged goods in the Torah, as is sometimes the case today in conservative Islamic jurisprudence. It's why a female can be stoned to death for premarital sex, because she has now damaged her value as an economic asset, because offspring that she produces might have no unknown or dubious paternity. In the Hebrew Torah, the wives of the patriarchs send their slave girls to get pregnant by their husbands to, up the baby count. And as we know, in modern America, evangelical girls sometimes attend purity balls or receive promise rings in which they pledge their sexual purity to their fathers until they can be given in marriage. So in this biblical context, the seemingly bizarre and hypocritical stance of defending Abrahamic life while simultaneously defending child abuse, the right of parents to beat their children or to deny them medical care or to deny them education in some conservative sects. It all comes together, right? A man has a right to offspring. A woman was made to bear them. And the writers of the Bible remind us of this, as have church leaders reminded of us down through the ages, over and over, that this is the fundamental purpose of a woman. In fact, it is said that that was her path to salvation. It's her way to make up for Eve's act of defiance, even if it kills her. And then within the hierarchy of the family, if you go back to things like the Bill Gothard seminars that I attended when I was a child, a woman's authority within the family is only authority over the children, and it's proxy authority. So she is acting as an administrator of God's will, which is articulated and prescribed by her husband. Again, the child is not a person with intrinsic rights. It is a man's possession. He or she, is a man's possession to bring up according to his own values and beliefs. So I'm right now speaking to you from a cattle ranch in British Columbia. And by way of analogy, this is how we think of modern chattel, i.e. cattle. And it's perhaps easiest to understand this concept today when it's applied to livestock, right? So a rancher owns his cows for the purpose of breeding them, and he guards their fertility carefully because he wants cattle of known known patrilineage. a young fertile cow is worth more than an old, less fertile cow. A bred cow is worth more than an open, i.e. non-pregnant cow. And a cow has no right to avoid pregnancy, no matter how unpleasant or risky, right? Her owner decides when she's had enough calves. And someone who deliberately caused a cow to miscarry would be stealing from the owner. Literally, they would own compensation to the owner. Once the calves are born, they belong to the owner, who has the right to poke or prod or kick or castrate them to get the kind of behavior that he wants. And there are obviously modern constraints on animal abuse too, but that is really modern thinking. Again, at one point in history, Americans thought about human slaves in much the same way that we think today about cattle, and they cited the Bible to back up this point of view. Today, most Christians around the world find human slavery appalling, and so the last kind of legal bastion of living sentient chattel, if you will, is non-human animals. But because the Bible and the Quran also bind believers to the Iron Age worldview, this notion of children and women as chattel is kind of subterranean throughout a lot of modern attitudes about the family. Now, I would say in this context, if you think about cows not having the right to decide they're not going to have a baby, what you also kind of realize is that even female birth control to some degree violates this idea of biblical property rights. And so you have things like the quiverful movement where God is in charge. The idea is let go and let God. Every baby is a blessing. An arrow for the man's quiver is literally the derivation of the name of the quiverful movement, one of his economic and spiritual assets. And again, a female is defined by her sexuality, by her ability to bear children and where she is at in that process, whether she's a virgin or a mother, a Madonna, or a mother or a whore. And then contraception turns the virgin or the mother into the third of these, a whore, right? Because she's having sex for reasons other than procreation. Now, so you have kind of within Catholicism, you have this anti-birth control perspective that I think personally evolved as a competitive breeding strategy. What we know is that there were other Christian sects that had a different attitude towards breeding or towards abstinence, and the ones that were most abstinent actually no longer exist. But this Catholic Christian competitive breeding strategy has its roots in something much more ancient. And as I said before, coerced pregnancy within the biblical context can be one means to this end. And I say this because what we are seeing increasingly articulated in the public sphere is the idea that women should be coerced to carry forward pregnancies, but also you're starting to hear a lot of very historical alarmist language about a population, kind of flattening or declining. We're all going to go extinct. There won't be enough babies to compete with India and China. We need, in order to have economic growth, we need population growth. I'm sure all of you can think of some of the holes in those arguments, but again, that idea comes back to this notion of children being economic assets. It just goes way back and it's very deep. So there is another way in which abortion itself violates a biblical worldview, and that is this, that even though in the biblical worldview, a woman's role is to carry forward, to bring life into the world, only males or only men are able to end life. And so if you look throughout the whole of Scripture, every time there is a decision made to end a life, whether it's in war, whether it's human sacrifice, whether it is punishment for some sort of crime or heresy or religious transgression, whatever it might be, only men have the right to end life. And so when a woman when a woman terminates an ill-conceived pregnancy, again, she is violating the biblical worldview in yet another way. Some people might ask, what about the religious rights personhood movement, where they seek personhood rights for embryonic humans? Doesn't that contradict this framework? I would say no, it does not. Because the anti-abortion personhood movement attempts to simply equate personhood with human DNA. So remember earlier, I said that children have the attributes of personhood. They have sentience. They have the capacity to experience pain and pleasure, the ability to kind of exist in relation to other sentient beings, to have preferences and intentions. There's a list of attributes that basically exist to kind of at their fullest in human beings on this planet, but that exist in various degrees in other sentient species, and to which we now kind of have an increasing understanding that they have partial personhood attributes and perhaps should have protections and rights for those attributes that exist for them. So rights based on what they are capable of experiencing and preferring. The contrast here with the religious rights personhood movement is that, again, it's just human DNA. It has nothing to do with those attributes of personhood. And so it doesn't really contradict this idea of the religious right denying personhood to children. You have it's just a ploy basically for them being able, since they can no longer treat children or women under property rights law, what they're trying to do is to co-opt centuries of evolution and construction of human rights law and political philosophy. So in sum, it's much easier to extrapolate from the biblical worldview to the idea that a parent should have the right to beat his child or withhold medical care, or that a teenage sex slave should be forced to bear a child, than it is to derive the idea that we have a responsibility to bring children into the world under the best circumstances possible and to acknowledge their rights as individuals once they arrive. Those are fundamentally post-biblical ideas, as is the idea that empowering women to delay or limit childbearing is a positive social good. So, kind of for those of us who are on the outside, we tend to think of these kind of contradictions within our moral framework. For most of us, some of these ideas that conservative fundamentalist Christians are advocating in the public sphere and living out in their own lives seem morally incoherent. We know much more than our ancestors now did about embryonic development. It's a reproductive funnel in which many fertilized eggs produce a few healthy babies. We also know a lot about child development and the way in which the gradual process by which children acquire the unique capacities that are present in adult human beings. And we know more than ever about the lived experience of other sentient beings, but that includes women and children, right? So we treat women as independent people, and we treat young people as at least partially independent. And we know that thoughtful, intentional childbearing, empowered by a full spectrum of family planning care, helps all people to thrive, not just women and children. It helps families to thrive, but it also allows men to live the lives of their choosing. Personally, I think we don't talk enough about how men and boys benefit from being able also to decide when and whether to bring a child into the world. And right now, because our contraceptive technologies for men are so limited, that's a whole nother topic. But men are dependent on the medical technologies that are available to women and making these decisions in community with the women who are their sexual partners. But we know now that all of this stacks the odds in favor of human flourishing. And so our view is very different. And it's a tension in our society, obviously, that these things that are so derivative of the Iron Age, and that people are so anchored through the Iron Age through these kind of what I call bibliolatry, text worship, that we continue to have a struggle over this. our Iron Age ancestors were doing the best that they could under the circumstances available to them, with the knowledge available to them, the technologies available to them, and the cultures in which they lived. But obviously today we can do a lot better.
Okay, so a first question we actually had written down. It's, what do you think we can do to increase support for reproductive rights access among rural red states, or within rural red states?
So I think if you think about what we're trying to accomplish here, it's the idea of people being able to form the families of their choosing at the time of their choosing with the partner of their choosing, right? And to allow parents to stack the odds in favor of their children flourishing. So bringing children into the world under the best possible circumstances available to those parents. In that sense, even though I'm a strong pro-choice advocate, and in fact, my most widely read article, which received an award, was titled "Why I Am Pro-Abortion, Not Just Pro-Choice." And I talk about being pro-abortion the way I'm pro-chemotherapy, basically. That it's our kind of last ditch. It's our last kind of line of defense when other things have failed us and have gone wrong. But I think that we are way too focused on abortion rights right now at the expense of being able to talk about contraceptive access and contraceptive technologies. So what I would say is two things. One is, of course, you should feel free to think about getting involved in abortion access if that is a passion for you. There's a group called Men for Choice, for example, that's really, I think, smart and well-read. I think it's a number 4 if you're looking it up online. But I also think that part of what we want to be thinking about is just how do we enable people to only get pregnant when they want to be pregnant, right? And that means some access to kind of top-tier contraceptive technologies. With the pill, it's almost like 1 in 10 couples relying on the pill gets pregnant in a year because there's a very significant human factors engineering kind of failure rate, if you will. You have to remember to do the same thing every time, every day, to switch your fertility switch off because it keeps flipping itself back on. And by contrast, the top tier long acting contraceptives, IUDs and implants, have a failure rate of 1 in 700 to 1 in 2000. So there are very smart organizations like Upstream USA that are working to ensure that those top tier methods, they're training systems of care to ensure that those top tier methods are available to all people who want them. And specifically, they are now doing remote trainings for medical systems in red states to ensure that providers of healthcare services broadly are able to offer top tier contraceptives.
Just because we have the microphone touched away, if anyone has a question, would you come up and sorry.
Test.
So our question was, do you have any books that you personally cite as an inspiration for your for the shift from evangelical Christian to what your current belief system is?
Oh, that's a good question. I mean, there are books that I love, like Christopher Hitchens' God is Not Great and Sam Harris's book, The End of Faith. But to be honest, my transition happened before I read those books, and it was more based on my life experience. The final blow, as I wrote about in my own book, Trusting Doubt, was when I was working as a psychologist on a consult liaison service at Children's Hospital in Seattle. So working on the kind of as a psychologist, but with families with kids who are suffering unto death, and listening to people trying to justify that in the context of their belief in an omnipotent, omnibenevolent interventionist deity. And just realizing it was so much, it was just a bunch of rationalization, justification, but it didn't make it just. And that was actually the final straw for me.
We have another question. What is the status of male contraceptives and when are they projected to be coming?
Yeah, that's something I feel passionate about because I believe that if family planning is a human right, that we're kind of full of baloney if we aren't talking about the 50% of the human race that has a Y chromosome and what it would mean for them to have truly reliable, truly reversible contraceptives the way that women do. And so the Male Contraceptive Initiative is a great place to track what is going on. And if you want to kind of put a few dollars into that fight also, or significant dollars into that fight, they are basically working with researchers across the country and in public institutions, universities to kind of move that forward. There's currently clinical trials going on with a gel that men rub on their shoulder daily to absorb it through their skin. And if you look at another reference would be the Emerge lab at the University of Southern California. The leader there is Brian Nien, who is an OBGYN and fabulous, fantastic advocate for male contraceptives. They are participating in the style for the gel. There's also a trial now going on in Australia with human subjects with it's like an injectable vasectomy, essentially, that is short term. So they do the injection. It's a kind of dissolvable polymer that lasts in the vas deferens for about 3 years. And then if a person wants to re-up, they can. But so rather than having to think about a long-term vasectomy, it allows young men the option to delay childbearing for kind of like somebody might with a contraceptive implant for a woman.
Thank you. That's really interesting. I actually didn't realize how few there were for men. Because you mentioned, I was like, oh yeah, there's only condoms and vasectomy. That's it. But our final question will be from me. As you were talking about the biblical sort of patriarchy, the children as property, I was thinking of the so-called parents' rights bills that are coming from red state legislature, and I was wondering if that was an attempt to, I guess, put a somewhat secular spin on what is a biblical principle, or how would you frame that? How would you categorize the parents' rights bills?
Yeah. So the short answer is yes, it is that kind of a spin. A lot of this has gotten triggered around questions of gender dysphoric and gender nonconforming children. With my background in child and family psychology and looking at child development and kind of the development of gender identity and sexual awareness, I would say I'm going to say something heretical, which is that a lot of gender dysphoric children, if they aren't transitioned socially or put on puberty blockers and such, go on simply to be effeminate gay men or kind of butch lesbian women and healthy and not medicalized. And so I think that the left is reacting to the right in some ways that are counterproductive on this, and they're going to end up harming kids, especially queer kids. But if you look at kind of what's going on, obviously the red states are clearly acting out of some of the same framework that we discussed today, and rather than out of medical science or kind of the well-being of children and all of the complexities and nuance that we need to be able to take into account around children's mental health and the emergence of sexual and gender identity.
All right. Well, thank you so much. Appreciate it.
Absolutely. You can find If people couldn't hear me well, there's an article on this topic at my website, valerietarico.com, and the title is Children as Chattel, What Religious Child Abuse and the Pro-Life Movement Have in Common. And you can also email me at valerietarico@hotmail.com if any of you have questions that you didn't get to ask.
All right. Thank you very much, everybody. Before we have a quick little talk from our treasurer, Richard Andrews, I did want to do a couple of quick announcements. We have our weekly card group and our bicycle rides. So talk to also Richard Andrews or Ted Andrews for those. And then July 5th, we also have Oasis Book Club at Moon Tower Inn, and they'll be discussing the book Ready Player One. So with that, we'll have a quick talk from Richard.
Thank you, Alexis. Hey, everybody. Thanks for coming. Don't forget that in addition to dropping money in the black hat in the back, you can also, if you're able to, give to Oasis by using the QR code on the back of the bulletin, not the one on the inside of the bulletin. That's for something else, although you can use that also. That's an easy way to give. Another way to give to Oasis is to be one of the volunteers, because it takes about an hour or more of setup ahead of time. So if you have a little free time before a Sunday session, you're welcome to come and be one of our volunteers. And I want to give a hand to all of our intrepid volunteers for today, particularly Kevin and the others who work on the audio-visual system. The audio is generally better than it was today. There was a technical issue, as you probably detected. So don't worry about that. So if you're not able to give, don't worry about it. We're just happy to have you here. As Alexis mentioned, we have other activities during the week. We used to have a whole bunch of activities during the week, but that always requires one or more intrepid individuals, pioneers, if you will, who take it upon themselves to organize stuff like that. So usually every Wednesday we have a cards group, usually bridge, but it can be other games. So you're welcome to contact me about that. We have the bike group that goes out and does a little bit of bicycling, nothing too strenuous. And that's every Saturday morning. We try to start early enough that it doesn't get too hot. And then there's the book club, as Alexis mentioned. And you're welcome to start up another group yourself on whatever topic you want. We also have the online group, what's it called? The Discord server. So if you're if you even know what the word Discord server means, then you're welcome to participate in that also. And that's, I think, still the largest single Oasis chapter. It's considered an official Oasis chapter, and that's online. And that's the largest Oasis chapter of all. So thanks again for coming. Bye-bye.